Wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, the only thing you can really do is just work to be the absolute best.
Hi everyone, I'm Leah Sullivan, and this is Breaking Precedent. Not only did I found TaskRabbit, one of the pioneers of the gig economy, I'm now a venture capitalist backing the next generation of rebels. In this podcast, we dive deep into stories of innovators who are pushing societal boundaries, challenging precedents, and setting new ones in their fields. My guest today is Soledad O'Brien. She doesn't just tell stories. She breaks the entire mold of who gets to speak, whose voices get heard, and what counts as the truth. Soledad is a multi-Emmy winning journalist, producer, and founder who's rebuilt the scaffolding of American media from the inside out. From Black in America to Latino in America, she's pushed back against sanitized narratives, reframed the lens, and demanded space for inconvenient truths. This isn't about louder, it's about sharper, smarter, more human. Soledad isn't just a truth teller. She is a precedent breaker, and I'm excited to dive in. Soledad O'Brien, thank you so much for joining me here on Breaking Precedent.
Oh my goodness, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited to chat with you. I'm a huge fan. I have followed your career for a long time.
Thank you. You're making me sound old. Long time?
Well, I mean, I feel like I grew up with you. I almost feel like I grew up with you. You know, watching
it is funny,
your
isn't
career.
It?
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
It.
No, I love it. And all the big stories, which we're going to get into.
Great.
You know, you end up being the moments people like me remember because we remember you reporting on these really critical, crucial, crazy times. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to start off with a quick little icebreaker because we don't know each other. And I like to start every interview like that. So you, Soledad, you've covered wars, you've covered uprisings, politics, but I know you have 4 children, and I want to know, what is the most ridiculous thing your kids think defines you as a mom?
What is the most ridiculous thing that my kids think? Okay, so my kids would say, so when you're a TV anchor, you do a lot of, especially on the Today Show, a lot of cooking segments. And then a lot of media stuff you do is like Soledad learns how to make gumbo. Soledad learns how to bake a cake. I cannot cook at all. And I can't. I don't cook. Really? I do not enjoy it. I hate it. It stresses me out. And so now that they're old enough to like Google search me, they're like, so Mom, here you are talking about how you love to make gumbo. And I'm like, made it once kind of thing. So I think that they're discovering that like on certain things, I'm never going to cook. And I think they think that's, this idea that I'm somehow a homemaker with a lot of skills is just not factually accurate about my life. Let's put it that way.
That is so funny. That's so interesting. Oh my gosh, I love it. So Thanksgiving.
We're doing a doc. We're doing a doc with Kat Cora right now. And I went to her house and we cooked together. And she's like, Soledad, 20 years ago, I was doing a segment with you, teaching you how to cook. You have learned nothing.
Nothing. 20 years later.
Exactly.
So you weren't hosting 25 for Thanksgiving then?
I do host.
You do host. Okay.
I make the gravy.
Love
and
it.
I pour wine for everybody. And that is my job. I oversee.
Yes.
I'm the executive in charge.
Yes. You're the perfect host. That's awesome.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to go way back because long before you were holding a mic, long before you were at CNN, I just feel like your entire life was this sort of precedent break throughout, not just your career, but your childhood too. I actually couldn't believe it when I was doing a little research and I realized, Soledad, your parents, when they got married in 1958, were an interracial couple, and it was still illegal in 20 states, over 20 states. It is
crazy, right?
It's completely crazy how in one generation that's possible. So I'm just curious. I mean, how did growing up in a household like that, where love itself was this form of resistance, how did that shape you to move through systems in your career and challenge them?
So my parents got married in 58 in Baltimore, Maryland, and Maryland was one of the states where interracial marriage was illegal. The year my little brother was born, so that would have been 1967. By then they had moved to New York. My dad was a professor. And by then he was their sixth child.
Wow.
So I think a couple of ways in which it shaped me. One, my parents were very good, and my mom used to say a lot, if you're waiting for people to get with what you're doing, you might be waiting a long time, which is very much a sense of like waiting for permission is just not the way to go. And I thought that was a really good lesson. My parents were also foreigners. My mom was Afro-Cuban. My dad was white and from Australia. And I think as foreigners, they were very obsessed with education. I think there was a sense that anything can be taken from you. But if you have education, that's yours. You will have it, what's in your brain forever. And so I think they really valued education. They were both educators, and it kind of made us value education as well. Like we really understood kind of knowledge and building on what you knew was really, really critical. So, they were also extremely strict.
Really?
And I think I was always the first person to leave a party, which was not fun.
Hold on. What was your birth order?
So my oldest is my sister Maria.
Okay.
Then my sister Cecilia was next. Then my brother Tony. Then my sister Estella. Then me. I'm number 5, but the youngest girl. And then my little brother is number 6, and he is the youngest across the board. And that was 6 kids in 7 years. Could you imagine?
No, I can't. Honestly, I can't imagine. I cannot. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But youngest girl, you would think by the time they got to the 5th girl, they'd be like, Soledad, you stay out.
They were better. Yeah,
were
they were better.
Yeah.
Yes, so much better. Because my older siblings weren't allowed to go at all. I think, you just wear your parents down. They just get to the point of like, you're going to come back right at 10 o'clock. That's your bedtime. Fine. And they go to bed. They just can't. They can't do it. But we did get a little more leeway than my older siblings, but they were still pretty strict.
Wow. So I know that, every journalist starts as an observer, and I'm curious, like even as a kid, what were you like growing up? Were you the quiet watcher? Were you asking questions? Were you the investigator? Like what were you like?
I was definitely not quiet. My name, Soledad, means solitude in Spanish. And I was very wrongly named because solitude was never my thing. I was social. I loved being around people. And so I never had to be the center of attention. I have a daughter who's an actor, and she just is the center. But I loved being part of the thing and be invited into the thing and doing the thing. And so I think you start to observe, and you really love being able to be the person who recounts what happened. I love storytelling. And sometimes that was, making up yarns altogether, or just like we had a newspaper when I was 9 that I,
wow.
Newspaper might be a strong word. We had,
but you created this newspaper when you were 9.
We did create a newspaper. My sister was creating it too. And we would go and interview people. Like my dad would be on a ladder. We'd be like, so Dad, what are you doing? And take notes on his answer.
My gosh.
So I think it was just constantly trying to figure out how do you turn everyday things into a narrative, not so that you could be the center of it, but just so that you could sort of talk about your world.
Yeah, no, that's pretty incredible. I mean, you've said growing up, you were sort of inside and outside. You were Spanish speaking at home, but you grew up in this very white Long Island community. How did that dual identity give you maybe an edge or perspective? I don't know, as a journalist.
Yeah, I actually have thought, I didn't realize it gave me an edge until I was a journalist, because I do think there's a real value in being both in a community, but also sometimes feeling distant from that community, because you can view it from the outside. And I think that's helpful in reporting and telling stories. But it's also helpful to be in it so that you can really understand what's going on. When we started reporting a doc series called Black in America for CNN, which was a very successful doc series back in, I think, 2008, I remember, it was so helpful to both know a community, but, because I had a different experience than a lot of other people, being able to kind of see it from the outside. So I've always thought it was an advantage. When I was younger, it felt a little bit like you just didn't fit in. People were pretty clear about, like, you're never going to have a boyfriend. My mother's like,
gosh.
Great. That's the best news ever.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
my gosh.
That was our goal. We've succeeded. But, I think when you're young, you just, I think it feels like I'm just not going to fit in. completely, even though I had lots of friends and a good experience there. And so leaving, and going off to college was really helpful for me, and meeting a lot of other people. But I really didn't value it until I started recognizing it's a little bit of a superpower. It allows you to, good stories. I think a lot of times in news, I would see people trying to talk about a community, Black community, Latino community, whatever, any community. And you'd be like, yeah, that's not really right. Like, you're really not getting it. This idea of the stereotypes are just wrong. So I know what the stories are, but if you do know, you have to be able to step out and ask the tough questions and make sure you're getting some insight on those stories.
Yeah, no, I love that sort of authentic connection that you have. And I mean, I had a little bit of a similar experience growing up because my father's Puerto Rican, my mother's white. I read very white, right? And I grew up in a very white community. And so growing up, it was like, no one really actually knew that I was half Puerto Rican. It wasn't until like college or after college or that first job, right? Where people start to realize and you start to see things that others don't. And you're seeing it because of lived experience, right? And perspective. Right. I think it is a superpower. Absolutely.
Yeah. But you really don't figure that out pretty well into your 20s, I think. And it's interesting too, right? Because I'm sure you had a zillion experiences of people, speaking Spanish, thinking you can't understand every word that they're saying and being like, I understand you. And sometimes, or speaking about Latinos, thinking that like, oh yeah, I'm sure you, white lady, agree with me when I say this horribly inappropriate /racist /mean thing. And you're like, actually, you'd have no idea who I am. So it gives you insight in that way as well, which is not always quite so great. But I think you do really see things maybe more clearly.
Yeah. And I think it's important insight. I always felt like I had this like secret spy sort of identity, right? Where like I would get information or understand things that others weren't seeing. So I think it's an amazing, amazing superpower. You've said as a kid, you could outwork anyone. I could see probably your work ethic came from your parents, right? And that like, instilling in you education and working hard. I'm curious, when did that drive turn into a career? Like at what point were you like, I'm just going to go to work and I'm going to outwork everyone and I'm going to make it into a career?
Yeah, I'm a Virgo. So I also think most of the Virgos I know are very tightly wound, kind of results focused all the time. And that was helpful as well. I think it was really when I started out, my first job at WBZ TV, I was a production assistant. I made $11,000 a year, which was it's so funny because I think my kids are like, so that must have been really good pay adjusted for, I'm like, no, it was terrible then too. That was a terrible
still
salary.
Bad. That's so funny.
And so a lot of my thinking, because I'm a practical Virgo, was like, if I'm not going to get paid in money, I need to get paid in experience. I need to gather up all the experience I can possibly get. And so I would volunteer for absolutely everything. And I got a lot of access because I was a PA. Everybody always was like looking for someone who would help with something. So yeah, I think it really kind of started at the very beginning. Like, how do I make this work? Because money is not, it's not the thing. I'm not going to get paid anymore. Then after that, I got promoted to a writer and I was making $25,000 a year. Still terrible.
Yeah, still not great.
It allowed me more access. And I remember once the Boston Marathon. So I was working at WBZ in Boston. And the Boston Marathon happened and they needed producers. And so I, volunteered to go on a Saturday and be one of the producers. Since I was not running, producer didn't
have to run.
I did not have to run, thank God.
Yeah.
And I remember our printers broke. My job was to run scripts to the anchors, but the printers broke. So I had to write stuff by hand for the anchors. Some of that writing was ad lib here kind of thing. But what it ended up doing was allowing me to have a crazy, chaotic story when I would apply for the next job about how I was a producer, right? I'm a PA, but actually, or a writer, but I'm a producer now. And as a producer, here was an obstacle that I had to overcome. And so I always was kind of looking for those, opportunities to do something and then be able to talk about it. Sometimes today, I wonder if you see this on the internet, there's a lot of, hey kids, don't ever, if you're paid to come 9 to 5, be there 9 to 5. And I understand why people might feel that way, but that was never a successful strategy for me. My successful strategy was get in early, say yes to everything, work really hard, and then if you don't like it, go get another opportunity that you can leverage off of getting in early and working really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is super smart to put that experience and opportunity over pay. Like you said, I'm not sure current generations see it that way, but I think our generation, like that's what gave me an edge too, right? In building my career. And so I think the learning is so much more valuable.
And then I think you also recognize like, okay, now I'm not learning and I'm being underpaid.
Yes.
Now it's time to go.
Right. Absolutely.
So I've got to get out of here. So, I'm never a big advocate for like work for free or be woefully underpaid for a long time.
Yeah.
But I do think you have to leverage the experience opportunity to get to a better position.
Yeah. Well, you didn't just build a career. You completely broke the rules on how media is shaped and who it's for. You said that 2005 in particular was a year that changed you. It was the tsunami, the Pope's death. It was Katrina. I remember watching you covering Katrina from, the stadium. You saw up close who gets centered in a crisis. Can you talk a little bit about that year and how it shaped your journalism?
Yeah, what's so interesting? Before that, I had never really thought about who gets centered. Stories were just stories. I go out, you tell them, you interview people, you put them together. And I remember going to cover Hurricane Katrina specifically. And you're right, 2005 was just rolling stories. We just worked constantly. And recognizing that the idea of like the narrative of the people who were at the convention center or the people who were in the Superdome or the people who were just in their homes or on their roofs, like they deserve to have their story told, and not just their story, but the context. Like, well, why did you not leave? So many people would say that to me. Well, why didn't they leave? They're like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Here's why they didn't leave. You live on this street. Your mother and their aunt live down the block from you. You don't have a car. You don't have the resources to stay in a hotel for an indeterminate amount of time because there's a hurricane. There have been false alarms before. So there's a lot of very thoughtful, smart reasons not to evacuate. And then, of course, the leadership really didn't call for evacuation until it was too late. So, kind of helping people understand communities. And I really did recognize, and that was fairly long into my career, like, oh, this gig is actually helping people make sense of what's going on, right? Like not just, here I am standing here telling you, the latest. It's, I want you to understand the community. I want you to understand why people do what they do, why they think how they think. And I think, and how different neighborhoods had different resources and different access, and wondering, like, let's talk about why that is. Later, when I did Matter of Fact, to fast forward a bunch of years, because we just wrapped that show after 10 years, we would talk about that show as being how policy lands on people. And I think it was a similar thing, right? Understanding, so here's a policy. We're not just going to talk about the policy. Let's talk to the people who are actually impacted for good and for bad by this policy. And I've always kind of loved that. But I think Katrina was the place where you began to recognize, like, this is what journalism should be. This is what I think my role in journalism could be. When we were coming back, we used to do a month in and then swap out and a month out. And I remember I was coming back through the Baton Rouge airport, and we were so dirty, you couldn't take a shower. It was gross. I remember I threw into my go bag that giant pack of diaper wipes, the baby wipes. And I threw that into my go bag. Yeah. And I would dole them out one at a time. They became very valuable. And we were walking through the airport and we got a standing ovation.
Oh my gosh.
Got a standing ovation. And I just remember thinking, like, I felt that people felt like these are people who are helping us understand this tragedy and what is unfolding at this moment. And I just don't think that kind of thing would happen. Journalists, I think there's a lot of mistrust and distrust in journalists at this moment. And so I've really always felt like journalism should be a service to help people make sense of something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's unpack that a little bit, the mistrust in journalism today, because it does feel like you're a truth seeker, and that's part of your value system. I mean, what do you think is going wrong in journalism today?
Well, I think many things. One is the competition. It used to be that we would compete with the other station. In Boston, we would compete. We were the number 2 station. We were competing to try to get the number 1 spot. But now you're competing with many other things, right? You're competing for eyeballs because some of those eyeballs are on social media. And social media is often grabbing eyeballs by being over the top and very dramatic. And sometimes, now with AI, sometimes just completely fake. And so to some degree, media has decided to hop in, cable specifically, with opinion. Here's how I feel about it, and hop in with, what I think is overly dramatizing. Or a lot of TV news today is somebody on the left and somebody on the right, and they kind of yell at each other for a chunk of time. And then the anchor says something like, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I don't think the focus is, well, let's bring in people who have experience and can help us understand the story, right? There's not, you're right here and you're wrong, because we set it up as this person versus this person. But most stories aren't verses, I don't think. I think people are trying to navigate their way through to understand it. It's complicated, right? The world's just complex. So I think media, to some degree, has brought that on themselves. I remember when I worked at CNN, oh my gosh. Do you remember when Britney Spears shaved off all her hair?
I sure do. I remember that.
CNN had a breaking news, came across CNN breaking news, Britney. And I'm like, this is not breaking news. We are an organization that covers like real hard news. But understand that when you do that, there is a cost to that. Understand when you bring on people who say, I think the earth is flat. That it's not just, hey, this is a guy with an opinion. It's you are giving the credibility of your platform to a person. You are saying his opinion is pretty much as equal as anybody else's. The minute you say, we're going to allow people who are not scientists and people who study things and have expertise to be replaced by people who just have a lot of followers, you just start losing your credibility. And there's a cost to that. So I think to some degree, media has done it to themselves. And then, of course, politically, we're in a challenging time where, when the president is attacking journalists per se, that helps, I think, really damage a credibility. It's just so completely odd to see. So I think it's very multifactorial.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where, business models can almost wag the dog here. Then you have the politics of it, right? And then you have this whole new technology layer with AI. And we're sort of at the beginning of this journey with AI too, right? And so to think about where this goes from here it's a little bit scary.
And AI's gotten very good, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure I remember at first you'd watch and you'd think, oh my gosh, the mouth is not synced to the person, right? Clearly AI. But it is improving in leaps and bounds where some things just look so real. Things that I know are completely fake, but they look amazing.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop. I want to talk a little bit more about your time at CNN. You shared the story about being there and being told that, white families have the same police talks with their kids as Black families do, which we all know is not true. You knew was not true.
It was such a crazy conversation because this was the guy who was my boss's boss. It wasn't just some random person.
Right.
And we were pitching our doc, Black in America.
Okay.
And we were doing something called TCA, Television Critics Association. So you stand on a little podium and you talk about, here's my doc. How did you pick the people? How did you pick the subjects? How long did it take to shoot it? Blah, 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 blah. And someone said, so what was your takeaway? And I said, one of the things that I found most interesting, so this is back in 2008, one of the things I found most interesting was that no matter who we spoke to, we were profiling a very poor Black family that was being evicted from their home the day we were there, a middle-class Black family that we followed as they took their kids off to college, an upper-class Black family that was in Hollywood, and the guy was a star, and he was very wealthy. But when you would talk about policing, they all sounded exactly the same. And they would say some version of, if you are stopped by the police, What you have to do is do not move, put your hands where the police can say, like a script. And so my answer to the critic the television critic who asked that question was, when it comes to policing, that regardless of your social class, that policing affects Black families very much the same way. So I came off the stage and my boss's boss, he said, well, that's just not true. I'm like, oh, well, we had spent 18 months working on this doc. So I'm like, actually, it is. And he said, white families do the same thing. And I said, well, I don't think so. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, so I have a little insight into this. White families were very much had the conversation of, don't be a jerk. Don't be sassy to the cop. It wasn't a sense of, I'm going to give you advice on how to save your life, right? Like, this advice is how to save your life. White families did not have that conversation. Black families at every level had that conversation. And he said, well, don't tell it again. Don't say that again. And you know what? I didn't for a really long time because I liked my job and I wanted to keep it. And it was so interesting to me to think about, like, what would make this person feel that was the narrative that had to be very important to him. Like, it mattered to him. And this was a person, by the way, who was funding Black in America, right? Like, super guy, great person, gave us gajillions of dollars to work on this project. We did it for 9 years. So it wasn't like, here was a guy who didn't care about minority communities or issues. He just could not, in his mind, reconcile the fact that policing for Black people and policing for white people, which has been proved by a zillion studies now, could be different. He just couldn't believe it, even though he had just sent me out for 18 months to do this story. So I thought that was really interesting. And, and then, of course, if your boss tells you not to do something and if you want to keep your job, you don't do it.
Right. I mean, two things about that. I mean, when you're in a room with leadership that is out of touch like that, how do you personally navigate that? How do you stand your ground? How do you make sure that the integrity of what you're working on stays intact? How did you handle it then?
I get asked that a lot, and it really depends on where you are in the hierarchy. Now, because I've been on TV a long time and I have a great reputation, it's much easier for me to say, oh gosh, no, actually you're wrong. There's a ton of studies. Would you like me to grab them for you? When you're younger and you're new, you really can't do that, because even if you show studies and you win the argument, you will lose the war, right? You will be a person who is not respecting the bosses, not respecting the leadership. And so I'm always very cautious to young people who kind of want to go in and say, well, I just need to speak up. And I'm like, well, if you're brand new, if you're the production assistant, maybe what you need to do is figure out who is the person who will understand what you're saying and go to them. And they're the person who brings the complaint forward. So, I think it's very tricky, because it's not even are you right and they're wrong? Are they right and you're wrong? It's does it come across as if you are challenging authority? Because not many people like that. So the higher that I got on the hierarchy, the more I was able to sort of argue my points and be a little more fearless about, like, well, this is just what I do and I'm right and you're not right about it. But it was very hard at the very beginning, really hard.
Were there other points in your career where you had these sort of inconvenient truths that you were telling and you felt like there was going to be blowback, or how did you handle it in other cases?
I didn't have a lot of that at all. People would ask me a lot when I worked at MSNBC. People would say, "Oh my gosh, so does Microsoft, call and tell you how to do?" And I'm like, "We wish Bill Gates would call. We have been trying to book Bill Gates forever. I would love Bill Gates to call me so I can interview him and put him on TV."
Right, Bill, call us.
So people used to think that that there was a lot of this pressure. People would think when I worked for a KRON TV in San Francisco, which was owned by the family that owned the Chronicle, that somehow they were calling the shots. Just not true. I mean, it just didn't happen. So no, I didn't have a lot of experience. It's kind of why it was so shocking. I just didn't have a lot of experiences with that at all. That was really unusual. I did have a lot of experiences with people feeling that they could tell you, they were happy to tell you if they thought you weren't very good. I had one producer. When I was kind of new to CNN, actually, and I had just come from NBC, and he said to me, "So I know you think, I know you're a star, but said in a very snarky way, "No, you're a star. We were going to cover the tsunami, 2005, end of 2004 into 2005. I know you're a star, but I want to tell you, if you can't hack this story, I'm going to put you on a plane home." And I remember I was probably on the verge. I just had my twin boys, so I must have been just about 40 years old, right? And I was just like, just the idea of like, put me on a plane. I'm like, I'm not 17 years old. What is this? And it was just such a weirdly disrespectful way of speaking to anybody. And I was so upset. I'm a crier. So when I get upset, I cry. And I called my husband crying. And he gave me really great advice. He said, there's nothing you can do. You can't complain, "Ooh, somebody's being mean to me." All that you can do is get out there and kill it. Like, just do a great job. And it's really been I think that was great advice. And it's been advice that I've sort of always used. Like, wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, the only thing you can really do is just work to be the absolute best. And that was great advice. So we were in Thailand, which was 12 hours ahead of New York. And our show was based in New York. And so I would shoot all day. And then at 6 p.m. in Thailand, that was the start of my show that went on the air at 6 a.m. And so I would anchor the show. And so we won a bunch of awards. We had a great coverage. We killed it. But I just thought, the idea that someone would feel utterly free to tell you, "I'm going to put you on a plane home." And I was 40 years old. It was so crazy and so disrespectful. And so mean. That really did surprise me.
I mean, it says, I think, more about that person than it does say about you, right? And I mean,
years later, that guy asked me for a job when I started my production company. And because
I'm going to put you on a plane home.
I'm so petty. I was like, no, I don't, but
it's not a good culture fit. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Those things do come back around. They really, really do. And also, I think it reminds you, it is about that person, but it also makes you have to toughen up, right? Just because I'm sure he's not the only one who would say that or think that. I mean, and to some degree, who cares? Focus on your work at hand and do a good job. That's what you're going to be judged on and what you're going to be graded on, if you will.
And doesn't it feel great when you just crush it and we just show them?
Yes, but it's why I don't mind being a crier, because I often cry first and then I go crush it.
Yes.
So I'm like, it's okay to be a crier as long as you then get up. My mom used to have great advice. She used to say all the time when something went wrong, take 24 hours to cry and then, get up and make your list of like what you got to do. And it was, again, very good, tangible advice of like, you are allowed to be upset in the moment and then move on.
Yeah, it's great. So when you moved on from CNN and you started Starfish Media, you didn't just change jobs, you really changed the gatekeeping. And I'm curious, what was the precedent about who gets to tell the story that you were most fired up to break?
Yeah, I think we just got to start picking more. And the truth is, you still have bosses, right? You have people you have to sell your projects to. But when I was leaving CNN, I had one of my bosses. I had pitched a story. We had done Black in America, Latino in America, Gay in America, Education in America. I did not name them. I think I would have been a smidge more creative. And I wanted to do a look at poverty in America, because at that time there was so much reporting on how many people were the working poor, working in the U.S. Capitol, but sleeping in their cars. I mean, it just, and I remember he said to me, who would want to see that? And I thought, gosh, I would. It's such an interesting phenomenon in America, right? This idea that you can work a full-time job, really be a hard worker and not be able to make enough money that you can actually afford a home and you're living in your car. And so I thought it was a great story. And so when he said that, I remember thinking like, you know what? I need to go someplace else, because I think there's a lot of really compelling stories to share that I don't want the gatekeepers, who I don't think necessarily understand or think about it the way I think about it.
Yeah. What has been sort of one of those favorite stories that you've been able to tell with that freedom that you took ownership of?
We've had so many great stories. When we did Matter of Fact, which we did for 10 years, we just wrapped up our last season. I remember going down to Puerto Rico and covering the aftermath of the hurricane that had devastated Puerto Rico, and really focusing on solar power, because many Puerto Ricans with a system, an energy system which is failing constantly, even before a storm, it's a very terrible system, had decided, like, I'm going off the grid. If something happens, I want to be self-sustaining. And I remember, and that was one of our most popular shows with millions of viewers. And I remember thinking, if I had gone to I was one of the producers of that show, and if I had gone to one of my bosses and said, idea, I go to Puerto Rico and talk about solar power in Puerto Rico, they would have laughed you out of the room. But because I had more leverage in producing that show and working with a team of people who saw it the way I saw it, people were like, yeah, that's a great show. And it did really well. So I think that was very helpful. And then, of course, when you do documentaries, I did probably 50 documentaries by the time I'd left CNN. And now we've done in the 12 years that I've run, Starfish became Soledad O'Brien Productions because people wanted my name in it. And we've done so many more documentaries, but I think being able to center people and let them tell their own stories has been so compelling. Like, you don't need me to, I don't need to sit here and explain it. Here's who this person is. Like, they can just tell their story. And I love the power of doing that, of saying, no, this is your story. Speak, tell it. That has been really great.
Yeah, it's so incredible. I mean, you have reinvented yourself more times than I think most founders, from being a local news anchor, primetime journalist, CEO, running your own production company, building a foundation for young women.
I think a lot of women do that, though. Don't you think? I mean, one of the things I love most about becoming a mom was I felt like the day after you have a baby, you're like, oh, hello, I'm a totally different person now. Like, I'm a person who does this now. I don't do that. I do this. And I actually really thought it was such a lucky thing. I don't know that men have the same ability to say, oh, well, now I'm a mom. I'm a completely different person. And I have a whole new set of values and how I run my life. I don't know that my husband had that same ability. Yeah. And I really felt like life changed.
That's why they have midlife crises, the men.
Yes. Exactly. And so
we get to reinvent.
Yeah. It is great. I mean, I really did love that. So, and I do wish it's such a great thing to be able to reinvent, because I think sometimes society wants everybody to stick in the same box all the time. And really, so many people are so multi-hyphenated, that they just do really interesting things. So of late, I've just been trying to tackle more things and kind of live the life that I want to lead, and have a career that's rewarding, and have extracurriculars that are rewarding, and have kids that I like and who like me back, and have a spouse who loves me and I love him back. That's, to me, is kind of well-rounded.
Well, it's interesting, too, that you bring this up, because I think, our generation was maybe one of the first, as far as women are concerned, to be able to have the flexibility to do that. Like, I don't know about you, but like, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and, she worked here and there, but like never a big overarching career, right? Like, but it was because of that stability and the education and the work ethic they instilled in me, right? That I'm able then to go and like explore and find all these interesting things. Do you find that's the same for you?
My mom always had a job once we were in first grade or something. And I think a lot of it came from her Cuban roots. This idea, she always had the sense of like, one day someone can show up at your house and decide that this is no longer yours. So you have to own things. You have to be able to make your own money. You have to be able to have a business. You have to be, and so I think I think it was kind of driven by a bit of panic is not quite the right word, but maybe just a worry that you don't want to be in somebody else's hands ever. So yeah, she had a job and my dad had a job. Yeah, I think it really, she always was going to work, and I always felt that I was going to work. I couldn't imagine an environment that I didn't work. And I think we were framing for our daughters and our sons the same thing, that, moms can work and enjoy their jobs.
Yeah. I think that for me has been so important with my kids, particularly my daughter, who's the oldest. She's 12. And it's like, I want to be able to role model for her everything that's possible. Right. And sometimes it's hard because you're traveling, you're moving around everywhere. Same thing for me, but I feel guilty sometimes. But I'm always reminded, but like, this is the modeling that I want her to see and know that she can pave her own career and her own life in the way that she wants to.
My mother used to say all the time, guilt is a useless emotion. Just like there's no point to it. And I also think sometimes we buy into things because we've heard them, like, oh, teenagers are so difficult. My teenagers were awesome. Like, it was so much fun to have them as and so I've really tried hard to turn around, and not for anybody else's consumption, just for my own, of like, no, this can be great. Someone will say, well, if you work, you probably have kids who aren't going to be able to, don't know how to do whatever, or don't even love you or whatever, or have bigger challenges. And like, just, it doesn't have to be. You can kind of create anything you want that you're able to do. So if you love work, then work. And if you say, I worked for a little bit and it was fine, but I preferred to be home, then do that. And I just really, I remember someone told me that once. I was interviewing them about teenagers, and they just said, and I had teenagers, so I was sort of like, oh, yep, we're entering the teenage years. And he said, I'm just going to caution you. Teenagers are awesome. Why not be the one who's talking about how awesome teenagers are? He's like, you're going to discover they are the most fun, the smartest, the most interesting. You will have the deepest conversations with a great teen. And he was completely right. Now my kids are all out of the teens and into the 20s, another amazing phase. So I really thought, like, maybe you're not guilty. Maybe you're just busy. Maybe you just feel like, holy cow, I've got 17 things to do today. It's hard to get them all done.
Can be overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah. So, maybe it's that and not guilt, but just like, I'm crazed.
Yeah. Well, no, it's fascinating that you say that too, because when I think back to my kids, I always ended up taking some sort of career pivot after the children, right? It was like after Amelia, it was a few years, and then we were selling TaskRabbit. And then, after the third, it was like, okay, I want to, start a new venture capital firm. And like, so you're like, I hadn't ever considered that as being a moment. When you think about when you had your kids, do you see that same sort of like career differences and pivots?
Absolutely.
You do.
Partly because I would sign a contract after I had kids, because it was never fun to negotiate pregnant.
Smart.
Right. You think like, you see me on TV, you know what I look like, but you lose a lot of your power. So I would have a kid, I'd sign a contract, and I would have a kid, and I kind of bounce back and sign a contract. So it happened every time. So every single time I had a child. And I think part of it was that, like, all right, I'm ready for something new. What's coming down the pike? What can we do? I love it. I love a relaunch. I mean, that's another thing my children would mock about me. They'd be like, oh my God, my mother's constantly relaunching. But I love the opportunity to just think, we're going to do something different now. We don't have to be beholden to what we did before. I love that.
I love that too. And I love all the experience and all the perspective and insight that builds, that leads into that new chapter too. It's exciting. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
I mean, you're definitely not slowing down. You have got lots going on.
I want to.
Do you really though? I don't think you do.
You know what? I do. I'm less crazed.
Yeah.
When I was at CNN, you were on somebody else's schedule. It's something I would be on a class trip, class mom, and then I'd get a thing that said, go to the airport. And I'd run, grab my go bag and go to the airport. And I'd have to like get another mom to swap in for me. So it happened more than once. So that was really crazy. Your schedule just was not your own. I'm still really busy. And, as you well know, right, you run a business. You go from, working your 12 hours a day to working 24 hours a day, basically at times. But I definitely have more control over my schedule, which means every morning I try to go horseback riding early, knock that out because I love it. It's such a great sport. And for Virgos, you cannot think about other things when you're riding or you will die. So it's really pleasant to just be, right, you just be focused on you and the horse. It's awesome. I just started taking ballroom dancing classes.
Oh, fun.
I am terrible. It's so much fun. And there's a thing called Cuban walk. And I'm like, oh, well, Cuban walk. I should be great at that.
I can do that.
No, I am not. It's so bad. But I love how it really challenges you, and really, it's hard. It's hard. I've never danced in my life. And so for me, it's not easy. It's hard. It's a struggle to learn the steps, et cetera, but I have just really loved it. And then really constantly saying, okay, here's a story. How do I want to do? How do we bring that to fruition? How do we make this thing happen?
Yeah. I love that cross-disciplinary, just learning, constant learning. I mean, it makes life so much fun.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a point you made just about the conflict-driven media, and particularly political media. You talked about how you get kind of two sides and they yell at each other, and then the anchor's like, okay, I guess we'll leave it there. So, this business model, it rewards this division, right, over depth.
And it's cheap.
And it's cheap.
To send someone out in the field costs $25,000 to $40,000.
Right.
At CNN, we had, and I haven't been there for so long, so I have no idea about the economics, but it used to be a lot of the people who were contributors were on salary, right? They were making $100,000 a year to contribute when they were called. And often they had a book they wanted to promote, or, so they had a reason to want to do this. And in fact, after I left CNN, people would ask me to come on as contribute, not as a paid contributor, but just pop on to talk about stuff. Something happens in Cuba. I spent a lot of time in Cuba. I would talk about it. And what you found was that it's just cheap, right? You can run your entire day without running a taped piece that gives context and explains. It's a lot of opinion. And it's kind of like if you ran a company and you were working through some challenges and you took your two craziest employees, right? One who's over here and they just kind of had them yell at each other. Nobody would run a business that way. You would run your business by saying, this is a person who's a really good mediator and who wants to understand all the sides to figure out how it all works. So I think this model is just inexpensive. And God, God willing, someone will say something over the top, which then gets picked up and now runs your news, the news you're going to cover for the next 24 hours. Oh my God, did you hear? She called so-and-so a Nazi. Did you hear? He said that she, what's her name? Who did sports on The Biggest Loser. She said this thing about slavery. And you're like, why is she talking about slavery? What is happening? You're an exercise lady. Why are you talking about slavery? But it's so over the top that suddenly it spurs this next round of coverage, right? Because it's very much mimicking social media. And it's a zero-sum game. You only have a certain number of hours and a certain amount of money. So here's what's not going to happen. There's lots of other stuff that's not going to be covered because we're all trying to figure out, Julianne Michaels' take on slavery in America historically, which, my God, again, blows my mind. So I think it's just inexpensive, right? It's inexpensive to have that round table on, and as opposed to saying, well, let's go into the field and report on that. There's a ton of information about slavery in America. We could just do that story. We could actually report on something that's happening today with its roots in slavery in America. It's not impossible, but it's just cheaper to have someone on, and it's just cheaper.
I know. I mean, given the business model and given where we are with technology today, do you see a path or a way that things could be built differently?
Yeah, I do, partly because I'm nauseatingly optimistic. I think that a lot of news organizations are not serving the public. And so because they're not serving the public, when we did Matter of Fact, people loved the deep dive that we did in our pieces that ran 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, which is so long for a TV news piece. But it was all about context. And people would tell me all the time, one, absolutely not partisan, and two, they learned a lot. They're like, oh, I never really understood that is why such and such works the way it does. That was our goal. So I think a model like that could really work. I think you're going to have one of the big platforms, streaming platforms, is going to do some kind of a TV show. When Brian Williams was hosting election night, right? That was a test to see, who logs in and watches his coverage. So I think it's going to happen. And also, young people do not watch TV news. they are not watching broadcast. Some of them are watching cable, but even I think the average age, last time I checked, for Fox was like 70 years old. CNN was up there, 68.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's so crazy.
They're
if you
all
think
online. It's like Hulu, Netflix, streaming. Yeah.
So I could see some streamer saying, all right, let's do a newscast that's online, not just plunk our broadcast online, but actually do a newscast that is online that could appeal to a lot of people. So I think that's really gonna happen. Some people, are doing independent shows. Independent journalists are doing that, but I think you're really going to see that supported in a big way by one of the big streamers one day.
Yeah. If you could break one precedent in the media that you feel like no longer serves us, what would you dismantle first?
Oh, there's so many. Do I just get one? Gosh, it would be, I hate opinion. I really like expertise. I'm happy with the expertise of people who I disagree with, but they're an expert. So if you were the ambassador to China and you have this thing to say about China, then I want to know because you have an expertise. I might completely disagree with what you're saying and your take, but you have something of value to add because you have expertise, and we have moved away so fast and so far from expertise to really focus on, well, this person's an influencer, or they have a lot of followers, or, they're valuable because they can bring in this audience versus, you know what? They really have something to say because they were in this amazing position, and we can give the context to people to really understand something. And that's been terrible, terrible.
Yeah. You've hinted at a project that intersects. We talked a little bit about AI with home life. Is there a problem that you're fired up to solve, that you're fired up to work on there?
Gosh, we have 2 docs right now that we're promoting. So I'm in LA, sneaking into a conference room at the the CBS station in LA. And one is The Perfect Neighbor, which is on Netflix. I'm one of the executive producers, and it's using all body cam from the police really to tell the story of a stand your ground case. The second one is a doc that we have on HBO that my production company did. It's a short. It's called The Devil is Busy, which looks at an abortion clinic post Roe v. Wade and how the security guard, the very religious security guard who runs essentially the safety of the clinic, how her day unfolds and what the implications are for the patients and for the doctors and the nurses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the work that we're promoting right now as we get ready to sort of think about, when you do docs, you're wrapping one while you're working on the next one all the time. There are so many really compelling stories to tell. I loved taking a policy story like Stand Your Ground, like Roe v. Wade, right? And then saying, how do we turn this into something that's interesting for audiences to understand? And again, if I went to a news director and said, you know what I really want to do? I want to do a deep dive into a Stand Your Ground case, that no one would approve that. But if you say it's actually structured, our director, Geeta Gandabir, talks about this a lot, is structured as a true crime story, right? It's with body cam. You can watch the story unfold and you can piece it together. And so that's a really creative way of telling a story about a policy that has a disproportionate impact on people of color. So, I really do find that is the big challenge. How can I take policy stories and have people say, holy cow, did you see that doc? It's amazing. It's so interesting what they did. That's kind of my goal.
I love that. What precedent do you hope your work gives future journalists permission to break?
I think there's a lot to the idea of being there. I often have young people tell me, and maybe they're not so young, maybe they're 30 and 40 now, younger than me people, saying, I knew when I saw you on TV and there was a Latina on TV, or I knew that when you were covering communities that nobody had really covered, and you were doing it with compassion and just interested in the story, like there was an opportunity there. So I've loved that. That's the greatest compliment that someone can say, your work had meaning outside of just, the specific story you're doing. Because I do think there's a lot of being able to see people on TV. I remember when I was growing up in New York on Long Island, there's a reporter named Gloria Rojas. And Gloria Rojas pronounced her name just like that. And I just remember thinking like, holy cow. She didn't say, hey, I'm Gloria Rojas. She was just at the end of every story, reporting live, Gloria Rojas. And I just thought that was the coolest, most amazing thing because she was like, oh, listen, I am a Latina and everyone's going to know it at the end of this piece. So I think there's a little bit of that. I never met her. I don't know her. But I love being able to steal things from people where they're clearly proud of their identity and proud of the work that they're doing and want to stand for something.
Yeah, well, representation matters. And Soledad, you have been such a bright spot for so many of us. So thank you so much for joining me here. This was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. That was Soledad O'Brien, a journalist who didn't just report the news. She reimagined who gets to be at the center of it. From elevating stories that were ignored to challenging an entire industry's assumptions about race, identity, and power, she reminded us that breaking precedent isn't always about volume. Sometimes it's about vision. If you're building something that challenges the dominant narrative or insisting that more voices belong at the table, let this conversation be your reminder, changing the story changes the system. And if you know someone who's breaking precedent in their own way, I want to hear their story. You can drop me a note at my website, breakingprecedent.com. Until next time, I'm Leah Sullivan.